Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And Senator Cornyn, welcome to Tyler.
Good to be back.
And welcome to the Northeast Texas Energy Summit. We're honored to have you here with us today, and we appreciate your willingness to share your thoughts with us about energy.
Or anything else.
Okay, we may take you up on that. And we'll have about 20 minutes of questions that the Energy Summit leadership has put together for us, and then we thank you for your questions that y'all asked, and we'll fit those in the last 10 minutes or so, Senator Cornyn. But again, we appreciate you being with us here today, and Tyler, we're honored to have you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, Senator Cornyn, before we get started with our program, Pete Olson is a U.S. Congressman, and also many of you may not realize he's former Chief of Staff for Senator Cornyn, and tells me that you made quite the first impression on your wife Sandy on your blind date.
Well, thank you for the question, and Pete, I know where you live. I will hunt you down. So, yeah, my wife and I have been married 41 years. And I can't believe that she's put up with me that long. I know many of you guys in the audience would say the same. But I was finishing law school in San Antonio, and my wife was going back to school. She was a school teacher in middle school in South San Antonio Independent School District. She was going back for another degree in accounting at Cornyn College there. And a friend of mine had just recently started dating a very attractive young woman, and I said, well, where did you find her? And he said, well, this other friend of ours was going to law school. I said, do you think he's got any more like where she came from? And so lo and behold, I ended up getting a telephone number, a potential blind date, but I had to call up and say, in one of the worst opening lines possible, I said, hi, my name is John Cornyn. Does that ring a bell? She said no. But then I went to pick her up. Fortunately, she said yes eventually. I went to pick her up, and she looked through the peephole of her apartment door, and she told me later on that she gasped and said, they fixed me up with an old man. Because even back then I had white hair, thanks to my mother. And but anyway, yeah, Sandy's a saint, like a lot of political wives, like a lot of our wives, who put up with our challenges, our careers, and our aspirations. But yeah, that was not the best of beginnings.
Well, amen. We appreciate you sharing that with us. Well, sir, we'll jump right in here. Senator Cornyn, East Texas has a rich history in the oil and gas business, and many people in this room, including myself, work in the industry. And we're proud, as Wayne Christian talked earlier, about the work we've done. We provide the most affordable, reliable, secure energy in the world. We've reduced our imports of foreign oil, increased our energy security, and due to clean burning natural gas, no country in the world has done more to reduce greenhouse gas emissions than the U.S. Can you comment, please, sir, on some of the recent executive orders and proposed legislation that have been discussed and proposed by the Biden administration?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I agree with the premise of the question entirely. Unfortunately, climate change has become a religion. And it's very difficult, I think, because most of the time people take for granted what you do day in and day out, which is provide low-cost, clean, self-sufficient energy and a diverse and low cost for people on fixed income, seniors and the like. And you would think that the country would appreciate that and would want to see that continue. I think right now President Biden's guiding principle when it comes to his executive orders is whatever the previous administration did, we're going to undo it. I don't think it's more complicated than that. But they haven't thought about what the second and third order consequences are going Winston Churchill was the Lord of the Admiralty in England. They went from coal-fired to oil-powered ships. And of course that transformed the importance of the Middle East and sources of oil and energy, and which obviously, because we've been dependent on imports for so long until recent years, this is a national security threat. Back in 1980, Jimmy Carter said if any country blocks the Strait of Hormuz, it's an act of war. And fortunately, because of what the industry has done, the great innovation, the investment, I mean, we're in the technology business, really. It seems like to me, just as an outside observer, and it's produced such great outcomes. But unfortunately, it makes it very hard in Washington, D.C., when this sort of religious attachment to climate change seems to trump all else. And we saw that recently in the Senate Finance Committee, where Chairman Wyden basically produced a bill that would tax domestic oil and gas businesses, frankly, many of them out of existence, would invest $174 billion in electric vehicles. I mean, at least what we could do, when I was talking to the head of ExxonMobil recently, talk about this huge carbon capture project that they're undertaking in the Houston area. He said, I know, Senator, you're not for carbon tax. I said, no, you're right, I'm not for carbon tax. He said, but it is important, if you're going to focus on carbon, to price carbon. Because he said there's a whole lot more efficient ways to reduce carbon in the atmosphere and subsidize electric cars for rich people. And I think he's absolutely right. But unfortunately, that's the battle we're fighting these days in Washington, D.C.
Right. No, certainly it does appear that it's become a religion, as you said, and I also appreciate, again, what Commissioner Christian said earlier. I think the industry is going to have to fight for the things we do and tell our story a little better. I think we have an energy literacy problem in this country, and those of us in the industry, I think, can do more to help in that area. But thank you for your answer, sir. Our second question has to deal with something that will be discussed this afternoon. We had a little winter storm around here in February, many affectionately referred to as Snowmageddon or Snowvid. You can take your choice there. But you recently introduced legislation, Senator, to help fund the weatherization of electrical grids across the nation called the Power On Act. And we thank you for that. And this would provide much needed financial support for our Texas utilities to upgrade facilities and protect our infrastructure from extreme weather events. Can you tell us a little bit about how this is progressing? And I might ask you also to comment on the restructuring of ERCOT and even Berkshire Hathaway's proposal to get involved and invest in our state's infrastructure.
I think I'll just hand my microphone to Senator Hughes. Well, the truth is, a lot of us are looking at this because this is, what, a 120-year weather event? And we weren't prepared. You know, in politics, if you ask people to pay for something, which is essentially insurance against an unlikely future event, they're going to look at you and say, well, is that really the best use of my tax dollar? But we did find ourselves with this historic cold weather event. And it reminds me a little bit of the old story about the blind men describing an elephant. And depending on what part of the elephant you got a hold of, you describe it as a foot or a trunk or an ear or the like. But here, because we are an all of the above energy state, depending on your perspective, people describe it as, this is the reason why we need to go to 100% renewables. Well, I don't, that's not, to me, that's not the lesson I learned from this, because the wind turbines froze, the solar panels were covered up, and others said, well, we need to, emphasize oil and gas production. Well, gas pipelines don't work very well, I understand, when you don't have the electricity to compress the gas. And then, so the only reliable base load really turned out to be nuclear. And of course, nuclear has been in disrepute for a while because of the problems with nuclear waste disposal. But to me, it demonstrated a need for a diverse energy supply. and a reliable base load. Because as we all know, sometimes the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, and you got to have something to keep the place running in that situation. But what I asked my staff to do is I knew the Texas Senate, Texas legislature, and the governor were going to be focusing like a laser on that issue, and I know you have, Brian. But we've tried to figure out, is there something at the federal level we can do? And so I joined with a friend of mine, a Democrat from California, with whom I agree on virtually nothing. But to work on a grant program through the Department of Energy to provide financial incentives to the states to weatherize their electrical grid and infrastructure. And in California, it's wildfires that shut down the electricity there. And in Texas, obviously, we need to do a little better job weatherizing our grid against unlikely but possible events like this. So I know there are a lot of different proposals. You mentioned the Berkshire Hathaway proposal and others. Obviously, we don't want to do anything more than we have to do to burden ratepayers, because we know none of this is free. But frankly, I consider myself to be sort of in a complementary role to what the Texas legislature and the government are doing to see what we can do to do our part, but recognizing that they really are the ones at the tip of the spear.
Well, on behalf of everybody in this room, we thank you for not agreeing with the Californians, sir.
They get it wrong all the time. Occasionally they slip up and say something sensible.
Yeah. Well, sir, you may have heard of the recent cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline, and there's been another one, of course, here recently on the meat company, JBS. And I'd like to think that this attack on the pipeline reminded us all that we still need fossil fuels. I'm not sure that's the case, but it also reminded me of the saying, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste. What I mean by that is a crisis creates an opportunity to do things that you may not have been able to do otherwise. How do you think President Biden will respond to this cyber attack crisis? With greater appreciation that the energy transition will be a transition, with more green energy initiatives, or with more regulation of pipelines?
Well, I'm not confident it will be a logical response based on facts and the evidence. But I would say that one of my biggest concerns for our country is our vulnerability to cyber attacks. And what I mean by that is we've all discovered that during COVID-19 how important broadband is and access to the internet. I've told people that only two good things that came out of COVID-19 were telemedicine and margaritas to go. That's the only two things I can think of that was good that came out of COVID-19. But we learned the importance of having access to broadband because of our kids having to learn virtually until they can get back in the classroom. So I do consider broadband to be part of critical infrastructure, particularly in this modern age we're living in. But we have to recognize that our adversaries around the world, particularly China, but to some extent Russia, have a totally different view of the internet. First of all, their own citizens don't get access to that information. They're blocked off. The Great Firewall in China, it's a police state, so they don't want their subjects, their citizens, to learn what's happening in America or other places around the world. And they literally, of course, attack our infrastructure to steal our intellectual property, which is where China is the most aggressive. Russia uses cyber attacks not so much to do things like steal IP, but they do use it to try to create chaos and disruption in our society. It's well documented, of course, back in 2016, that they use what they call active measures, which is disinformation, to create chaos and conflict and stir up conspiracy theories and the like. Basically, President Xi and President Putin want to be able to say to their people, look at America. they're a mess. They're in chaos. There's disturbances, there's lack of security, and we are a better form of government for our people, which, of course, nobody believes with an ounce of brain power. But the cybersecurity thing is a huge problem because we don't know to what extent our infrastructure has already been infiltrated and could be with a flick of a switch or a click of a mouse shut down. And of course, there's no real difference between the criminal organizations that shut down the colonial pipeline and the Russian government, because essentially the whole Russian government is run by corrupt individuals. So this, I think, is a huge vulnerability and one we really need to up our game on.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Well, Senator Cornyn, the administration seems every day that we're all reading about it in the paper, is proposing a multi-trillion-dollar plan to broadly rebuild U.S. infrastructure and move the power sector to 100% emissions-free electricity by 2035.
Good luck.
Can you give us an update on how this is progressing and how you see this impacting our state, please, sir?
Well, I think it's pure fantasy in the first place. Again, this is part of the cult or religion of renewable energy, and this is just the Green New Deal wearing other clothes. So obviously, we are taking what is a great national asset and jeopardizing that by taxing and regulating it into oblivion. The tax code alone, they want to pay you $7,500 to subsidize your purchase of a new electric vehicle. While oil and gas companies are being denied their basic operating business deductions, but this is not part of the narrative in D.C. So I think the biggest problem is this industry does its job so well that people have come to take it for granted. And I agree with Wayne. There's basic illiteracy when it comes to energy. I actually asked my colleagues in Washington, D.C., said, oh, you want us to go to all electric vehicles? Talk about socialism for rich people. These high-priced vehicles, you want hard-working Texans to subsidize your purchase of a F-150 electric pickup truck, which comes in around $100,000. It's craziness. But my question to them is, do you know where electricity comes from? And they look at me like I'm asking a dumb question. Well, it comes from coal, it comes from natural gas, it comes from renewables, and hydro, depending on where you live, and maybe some nuclear. But there's just simply a complete ignorance when it comes to what the sources of this energy are. So even if you've drunk the Kool-Aid and you believe in socialism for rich people, that you ought to subsidize wealthy people's purchase of electric vehicles to save the planet, well, you still got to come up with the electricity to charge the battery.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you, sir. We'll move into the questions from the audience, please, sir, if that's okay. And we have some good ones, I think. The first one is, do you believe the University of Oklahoma will win the Big 12 again this year? That one must have come from the Muber table. I'm sorry.
When I heard you went to the University of Oklahoma, I figured that matched up pretty well with Curtis Muber's background, so I understand the Oklahoma connection.
Okay. No, this is a great question. There's been a lot of discussion throughout the country, in particular here in Texas, about improving our telecommunications and broadband. And the question is generally about funding for broadband in Texas, and can you share with us your thoughts about when that might happen?
Well, I know the Texas legislature has paid a lot of attention to this, and there's a lot of money available both at the federal level and the state level, but I think we need to come up with a strategy to make sure that whatever investments the government or taxpayer makes in enhancing access to broadband doesn't compete with the private sector. It supplements what the private sector is already doing. Because of course it's commercially attractive to the private sector to build out that broadband and dense populations where they have a lot of customers. But out in West Texas or somewhere like that, or the Rio Grande Valley where I was yesterday, about a third of the kids who were supposed to go to school virtually didn't have access to broadband. And you can't obviously go to virtual school if you can't get on the internet. So I think we're all recognizing the importance of this, but again, my guiding principle is let's not compete with the private sector, let's figure a way to supplement the non-economic applications which will actually enhance access to broadband. But I'm also just intrigued by people like Elon Musk, who, if you are not familiar with the Starlink project, I mean, this guy has got a brain as big as this room, but he comes up with all these crazy ideas which actually end up being very innovative. And the Starlink technologies are launching a bunch of small satellites into space and through SpaceX's reusable rockets and getting people access to broadband basically anywhere on the planet. Now, they're only at the beginning of this program, project now, but once they complete it, supposedly there'll be near universal access to broadband. At what price, I'm not sure, and that obviously is going to be a consideration. But I think there's ways that we can continue to enhance access to broadband now that it's no longer just a convenience. I think it's a necessity.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Well, this next question is a great one. I think everybody in this room believes that the oil and gas industry has a future in spite of what we may read in the paper or hear from Washington, D.C. And one of our earlier speakers talked about some exciting things that are going on in education related to oil and gas. And the question is this: what role do you think the education system can play to prepare the next generation of Americans for oil and gas industry, trades, and jobs?
Well, my favorite story along those lines is I was in Laredo, Texas, about 3 or 4 years ago, and of course with the Eagle Ford Shale booming down there at the time, there were a lot of good-paying jobs that they were just looking for a trained workforce for. And I remember going to a 7th grade, I think it was 7th grade science class, and basically they were teaching the basics of petroleum geology and everything from how to basically develop a competency to get a good, well-paying job in the oil and gas business. So to their credit, they viewed this as a junior college level or community college, and at the high school level as a way to train the workforce. Because I know that's going to continue to be a challenge as we all are more and more challenged by the technology enhancements and trends, and that certainly is true in the oil and gas business too. It's going to take more than a few roughnecks out of a rig, sling and chain to get things done. If our kids are going to have access to good, well-paying jobs, we've got to start early by providing them an opportunity to choose skills that will help make sure they are employed as well. They need that help in our economy, and certainly the oil and gas sector needs that help.
Yes, sir. And the senator was talking earlier about, and he's well aware of the role of artificial intelligence and data sciences, just the amount of data we're moving in the industry now. And I know we have some incredibly bright people in the industry, young people that really are gifted in that area in terms of just handling the technology and the innovation. And it's been amazing to see the impact on the industry.
Well, I had a colleague who's since departed, deceased, unfortunately, in the Senate when I got there. People were talking about the internet and that sort of thing, and some reporter asked him, well, what is the internet? He said, well, it's a bunch of pipes. That's the way he described it. I mean, obviously he didn't really have a good handle on that topic. But my point is that most legislators are generalists, and we hire good staff. We depend on our constituents to help educate us and inform us about things we need to do on their behalf. But you mentioned artificial intelligence. This is sort of the new buzzword. Data science, big data has been with us a while, but now we're producing so much data from so many sources. This is basically China's game right now. They've been stealing as much data as they can from every source that they can get. And now, with artificial intelligence, they can exploit that data well beyond the capacity of human beings to review it and use it. And this is one of the big competitive challenges we have now with China, to make sure that we are competitive, and hopefully we'll beat them when it comes to the competition to not only get 5G implemented, but quantum computing, AI, and machine learning. And they're spending huge amounts of money to try to exploit that, not only for economic purposes, but also for military uses.
Right. Time for one more question, Kathy. Well, you just teed up the next question perfectly, sir. The question is really this, and I think it's appropriate. What are the geopolitical implications between the USA and China in an energy transition from oil and gas to solar and wind energy? And you talked about the competition, sir.
Well, one of the amendments that I was able to get accepted at that crazy markup in the finance committee, where they essentially tried to conduct a frontal attack on the oil and gas industry, was I said you can't use any of these subsidies to buy Chinese manufactured electric vehicles. And even my colleagues who are big advocates of electric vehicles recognize that wouldn't go down very well. But we are, I like the way that I can't remember the name, Rand Corporation described China and Russia. They said China is a rival, not a rogue. Russia is a rogue, not a rival. But what China's been doing over the years is slowly but surely building up their economy, and obviously they have a command and control economy. It's not like ours. And they are gradually making huge investments in all these technology areas. They've been also stealing, as I said, as much data and intellectual property as they possibly can. They become increasingly belligerent in places like the South China Sea, through which it's not quite the Strait of Hormuz, but it's the Strait of Malacca, I think it's called, is placed through about 1/3 of the world's trade volume transports. And now they're building artificial islands, putting air bases on them, flooding that zone with fishing boats, which actually are working for the government in order to impede international transit through these international waters. So this is, to me, the #1 challenge of our time. Russia was a big challenge because of nuclear weapons, and obviously we should all say a little prayer and be grateful for the fact that we've been able to deter the use of a nuclear weapon. And that's the reason why we've got to make sure that countries like Iran never get one, because they're not subject to the same rules or guidelines of deterrence. But China is going to continue to be a challenge for us, and we're going to have to change the way we think about what the role of the federal government is, I believe. I'm a free market conservative, but when I see China investing billions of dollars in strategic investment, like new things like 5G, AI, quantum computing, machine learning, and the like, I worry that we need to be competitive. And one of the things that COVID-19 did demonstrate is our vulnerability of our supply chains. 90% of the semiconductors made in the world come out of Asia. 63% of them come out of Taiwan. And so we've got to do some things a little differently. We've got to think differently if we're going to stay competitive with China. One of the worst forms of government you can possibly imagine, but what they want to do is dominate us and reduce our sphere of influence in the world. And I think we've just got to double down and compete and win that competition.
Amen, sir. Absolutely. Well, Senator Cornyn, thank you again for your time today. We appreciate your leadership in Washington, D.C., and if you would please join me in thanking Senator John Cornyn for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.